Hi, I'm Pete Chow. You may know me from the RTO Show podcast, but today I'm doing something a little bit different. APRO and Wow Brands have launched a special project to bring the story of our industry to life like never before. They've asked me to sit down with some of the true legends of rent-to-own, capturing their stories, their impact, and their vision for the future. And now I get to share those conversations with you straight from the legends themselves. All of this leads to something groundbreaking though, a new book, The Rent-to-Own Revolution, A Definitive History of Advocacy and Consumer Access, written by APRO CEO Charles Smitherman and Wow Brands CEO Brian Krast. The book explores the grassroots of RTO, the advocacy that has defined it, and the future that we're building together. Here's where you come in. We're giving away free copies once the book is released. Just head over to the RTORevolution.com and sign up for a chance to receive a copy in early 2026. Don't miss the chance to be among the first to hold this piece of RTO history. That's RTORevolution.com. Check it out and become a part of RTO history. Hello, everybody. My name is Pete Chow. Welcome to the RTO Show podcast. Today, we're doing another Legends, and you've seen this legend before, but this one's in a different capacity. Right now, we're kind of peeling back some onions of the history of what Showplace has been, where Gary Ferriman is going, but more importantly, how we got here. The times that led us to the greatest part of rent-to-own era right now is where we're sitting at, and I love the fact that I can sit across from him now because, there are so many people that didn't make it. Some businesses that came through and they stopped, it didn't find a way, or it was just their time to call it a day. And we lost a few people this year. We're sorry to say that, but they are remembered. And I will always say, I said this to Gary many times, and I will say it again, everybody mentions Gary Ferriman's name because he does such a good job. He's been a president of APRO. You and your wife have done a lot for this industry, and you told me that it wasn't for her, you wouldn't have been able to make it this far. Keith's kind of holding the torch, your son now going through it, yes. And you kind of letting him take on the reins, so to speak, in Showplace, which I love to see that because this is something we need those generations to come through. So Marianne's allowed you to be on the trip board. You guys go to LegCon every year.
It's been a couple years since I've been now, but for most of the time, I went most every year.
Well, the years that count.
Yeah,
right.
I've probably been there 20 times. So
that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to peel it back a little bit, and we wanted to start at the beginning when Showplace kind of first started. I know that you had mentioned that even in the beginning, you were using a family vehicle to sometimes deliver some of the product. How hard was it? First off, what was the decision going into, let me start a rent-to-own company that said rent-to-own is where I want to go versus any other company?
Well, again, our initial business was just selling TVs. So it was used TVs for a lot the same demographic that we're handling with our rent-to-own, but we were just selling used TVs for $150 and making Frankensteins out of trade-ins, and it was just one of those guys that I was buying large sums of TV trade-ins off of a retailer, that multiple locations that let us buy his trade-ins, that said, "Did you ever think about putting them out for $10 a week?" And that's when we kind of got excited about it. We had never heard of rent-to-own then, and this guy really didn't mention the rent-to-own transaction. He just said he used to take his trade-ins and put them out for $10 a week himself. So we kind of cooked on that idea as we drove back with a box truck of trade-ins. And I talked to my partner at that time about that and said, "What do you think about advertising $10 a week?" And he said, "I'm good. Well, let's try it." So that's what we did. That's how we started being in the rental business. We didn't know it was a rental business. I don't think we even used the word rent at that point. But I just dictated on a legal pad to my wife on the truck trip back, kind of a 2-paragraph agreement of how we would let people have TVs for $10 a week, and if they paid for 52 weeks, they were theirs. So that's kind of our entry. Along the way, within the first few months of doing that and advertising that and getting some used TVs we would have typically sold out without getting much cash, but waiting on the cash, we started realizing there was such a thing. There was a store in town that was renting things, and it was kind of similar. So then we kind of absconded one of their agreements so we could kind of brush up my legalese on our agreement, and that company wasn't in business very long in our town and left, and we remained, and then we started renting new TVs and VCRs, and so it evolved from a used TV business.
About when did you start renting the TVs versus when you had your own repair shop?
We started the repair shop in the spring of '82, and we started renting the TVs in the spring of '83.
So about a year later, you decided, you know what, I'm going to try this guy's idea. Do you remember his name? Was he like anywhere to do with rent to own, or he was like?
He was not rent to. He was Bill Schooneman TV and Appliance out of Cleveland. Had multiple locations, I think 5 or 6 at one point. But when I was working with him, I think he was probably 75 years old, and he still had 3 stores left. And we were just buying his trade-ins, and this was probably in '83 when we started doing that.
So Gary, as you're going along, you have a TV repair business. And you obviously took a good idea and really ran with it, but now you're in the rental business of TVs. When did everything else start showing up? You said, VCRs and stuff, and was there anybody who looked at you and said, wait a minute, you're not selling this, you're renting it? And they didn't go, yeah, I don't know about, opening up a line of credit for that. Or did you not have that issue, but you were still able to bring in product?
We started on a shoestring. We didn't borrow any money. We remodeled this building myself out of pocket, out of her and I's full-time job wages, and got it open. I think my partner and I put $15 each in a petty cash drawer to make change with, and that was our investment. We opened a bank account, and maybe we put the first couple of days receipts in there, was put $1 in to open a checking account, and then started putting receipts in it. And we decided not to take any wages for quite a while. We didn't take. We all had jobs. My partner and his wife and me and my wife all had full-time jobs, so we just didn't need the money that came from that business at all, and we didn't take it for a long time, and we let it build up until there was cash, and then we got an opportunity to be a Zenith and a Sylvania dealer, Quasar dealer.
Quasar, yeah.
Remember Quasar?
Yeah.
But and so they had floor plans for those, where you'd buy them, they'd deliver them, and then you owed the floor plan company for the TV, and they come around and did a monthly audit, and if you'd sold it, you owed them for it, and it wasn't spread out. You just had to pay the whole wholesale price.
Okay, so it was like you sold it, you bought as you went. If you sold it, you had to pay for it.
Yeah, but we had built up enough cash to afford. If somebody gave me $17 for the first week's payment, and it was $430 cost TV, we had to pay $430 at the end of the month for that.
Oh wow!
And we just did it weekly. Every week what we sold. So when they come and did the audit, there wasn't much to pay for, which most of their dealers waited till the auditor came. We always just paid as we went. But we had built some cash in there because we weren't taking anything. We just would pay for them, and we never got upside down. We just because we didn't take cash, and then I think about a year in, we started taking $75 a week each. My factory job at that time, I was clearing about $300 a week, but so $75 a week wasn't like a full time. You couldn't live on $75 a week. But that's my partner and I each took $75 a week for maybe the next year or two. And by then, cash was pretty good, and we remodeled, and eventually we moved into a different location, and that took money. But it was just operating inexpensively on a shoestring, and not we never got debt. We just didn't amass debt.
So were they the ones that brought in the VCRs and the other items, or like they give you the TVs at first? Did they also do that with the other things too?
Stereos and VCRs. There was electronic distributors back in those days. Mostly, you weren't buying directly from Zenith. You were buying from It was the Tracy Wells Corporation in Columbus, Ohio, or MAS Distributing in Northeast Ohio. They'd bring you Sharp stereos or Gibson appliances or whatever. We were just TV and electronics for probably for about 3 or 4 years, and then we added appliances in about the 4th year maybe, and probably furniture maybe in about the 5th or 6th year. So I mean, it was just a step at a time back then. One location for the first 7 years.
So when you went into these other, like let's say appliances, right? When you go into appliances, was that also an easy transition, or was there any friction there because you were a different type of retailer?
No, there was back in those days, other than Kmart, because really Walmart wasn't around then.
Right.
But there, most of the TVs and appliance being sold in mid-sized town America were mom and pop TV and appliance stores. So it was very common to have both.
Okay.
Furniture was a little bit unique to add in there, but there was furniture stores that sold TVs too. I mean, you could go to Elder Bierman's, the department store, and buy furniture or TVs or appliances back in those days. But
so then the big
Sears,
So then the big transition wasn't really the appliances or the electronics to smaller electronics to appliances. It was getting furniture.
That was a pretty big transition. You need a lot more footprint, a lot more square footage to show furniture for sure.
What was a hurdle that you can say, we made it, but there was a little bit of attraction? I mean, you're saying the square footage. Is that why you ended up getting a bigger location?
Building, yeah. In 4 years, we intended to take appliances and look at furniture, and so we bought a bigger building and had the space. We also were renting movie tapes then. We were a little mini Blockbuster in our area, but eventually we quit doing that. And along the way, we bought a carpet store and tried to keep the carpet department alive and sell people wall-to-wall carpet and have installers that would put it in their house. We tried a lot of different stuff.
Like, going back then, not really knowing some of the things that you know now, what were some of the first vendor experiences like?
A really unique one was very early on when we were a used TV shop, having a TV distributor salesperson come up and say, have you thought about having new TVs? We have, this guy from Tracy Wells, Bob Broderick, said, can I bring you a dealership for Zenith televisions? And we said, yeah, I think that's interesting. And he said, oh, by the way, I have a partner, and we run a rent-to-own store in Columbus. His name was Pete Bush, and he was the first president of Ohio Rental Dealers Association. He formed it. And Bob was his partner, and Bob was a salesman, an electronic salesman, and appliance. So he set us up, and we said, well, we can only rent so many new items because we can only afford to pay all at once for so many things to grow so fast, or we'll run out of cash. So we kind of tethered, we mostly wanted to rent used because we owned that stuff and the margin was better. And when you had to buy new, your margin was less. So, and the cash flow out was quick. So we were careful with that as we went. But that vendor experience was really positive for us because he was teaching us how to be a new TV dealer, teaching us a little bit about appliances if we wanted to have them. We didn't for a while, but and then teaching us about there being this state association and this regulatory effort to try to get a law passed in Ohio that would codify the agreement that we were doing, and so we got involved in that, and we joined the Ohio Rental Dealers Association, and as the AG's office worked with a group of rental dealers and some national lobbyists that companies like Rent-A-Center, the bigger companies, were helping fund and fuel this guy coming around and helping us educate our AGs and giving us sample language to build state laws. And we got involved with that. That's where I met Daryl Tissett. That's where I met Ernie Llewellyn, John Butts of Sunrise, a bunch of Ohio area dealers.
So, as you're going into this legal part, right, the RDAs, what was some of the biggest hurdles, or let's just say one? What would you say has probably been your biggest hurdle in that era where you're starting, in the early '80s, or let's say even late '80s? What was the biggest legal hurdle in that time frame?
Well, I think, until we got into the 90s where we had Henry B. Gonzalez trying to outlaw our business. But back earlier, I would just say it just took time and effort to educate the AG's office about what we were trying to do and get them to see the value we provided for folks that needed it. I would say, as far as a legal hurdle, it's the patience, the effort, the time away from business to talk to state senators and state reps, not so much U.S. because this was state law,
Right.
But learning who those people were, because at 20-something, I didn't know who they were. When you voted, you might have seen who you were voting for president on TV, but I don't know much about any of those state legislators.
I will say, I don't think much has changed nowadays.
Yeah.
I think depending on what side of the aisle you lean on, half of the people you don't know, and you go, well, I hope that they're aligned with with what I say, and they're going down to take it, because I've seen a lot of young people do that. But we won't get into that. But so I know, talking to the Strunks and talking to some other people, there was a time frame when you started rent-to-own where there wasn't the technology to run the rent-to-own as we know it today, right? There was no computer systems
Like
that
software,
ran what we did. And then eventually something came along. Two questions, so it's really the same thing two ways, but number one, how great was it, did it affect you to get onto one of these systems? Did it make a huge difference in your business? And the other one is, what was the name of the software that you got into with?
Yeah. Well, when we first began, without any question, I was flying without had never been in a rent-own store. So I knew no way anybody else did this. So I bought, my mom had gotten laid off as a bookkeeper from someplace, and my partner said, yeah, we can hire your mom. We can't pay her much more than minimum wage, but if she needs a job, we'll hire her. So my mom went to work, and Mom and I decided we would go out and buy a recipe box and index cards. And when we rented a TV, Mom would write the TV model number, brand, serial number, and then start writing Friday dates, like May 7th would be 5/7. And when somebody'd make May 7th's payment, she'd draw ink line through it. And she would just keep them ahead on dates. And the top of the card would say the beginning date and the ending date and the cash price. And we just had concocted on that truck trip back from that guy's place that we were going to take 52 weekly payments, and we were going to make the cash price 26 of them, and we were going to let 50% of what they paid us apply to the cash price, and they could buy out anytime they wanted early. So that was a personal concoction that ended up being the way we decided to build Ohio state law.
I was just about to say, that a lot of people have built it off that model.
Well, in the early days, the big guys only wanted to apply 35 or 40%, and a lot of AG's offices didn't like that. And my 50%, I think, was winced at by a lot of my peers when we were real young in the business and first seeing people, but it ended up being adopted as a pretty common practice, I think. I'm not saying that I'm the only one that come up with that idea, but I thought I was at the time. I'm sure somebody else probably come up with the same idea.
And what was the name of that system that you guys went to finally?
Well, so that was all manual. And then we found out there were such things for small loan companies where they had those green cards. And so a lot of us, before we had computers, ended up getting away from the index cards, and there's a real nice Ledger green card that was a part of the small loan company business, and we bought those. You could buy them at an office supply. And then the very first thing that happened electronically is a guy my mom had previously worked with at the telephone company was a programmer, a computer programmer, back in the very early days when you pretty much could only buy an IBM or a clone to an IBM computer. And he helped us buy a clone and wrote a program that was just an accounts receivable program for our payments. There was no reports, no ability to pull a report or do tallies for you. It just helped track the accounts receivable for each account for that customer. And we run that for a couple years. And then we were at probably one of the early conventions and probably run into David Goldman, and the first real rental software we ever had was Ideal. And I think we probably did that in about 80, I'm going to say we probably ran manual till 84, and then we probably ran that homemade program from the guy at General Telephone till maybe about 86 or 7, and then we signed up with David probably in 87 and 86 or 7, something like that, and had Ideal software before VersaRent.
I was just about to say,
it was called Ideal Software then.
How was it? How big of a difference is it from that system to the system they have now?
Oh,
Night and day.
Night and day. I mean, there was some reports, but not nearly like there is now. And there were, we didn't understand access to SQL and any of that kind of stuff back then. Report writers were something that took real smart people to deal with back in those days. And we were with David for a number of years, and then we decided we wanted to try High Touch, and we were with High Touch for 20 years. And then in 13 we moved back to VersaRent.
It's crazy because in the early 90s and early 2000s, I think High Touch was the brand to go to.
60 or 70% market share, I think, at one point.
Yeah, I mean they were just everywhere, and pretty much if you know how to run High Touch, you pretty much knew you could walk into any store if you had the clearance and kind of just go through. I mean,
because even Rack had it. I mean,
yeah.
I think they might have bought source code and had kind of their own version of it, but yeah.
Yeah, well,
it was
when
everywhere.
I was at Rack, when I started at Rack back then, that's exactly what we had. Take this out, but as you're going along, you start this legal journey. You're in the RDAs. When did you first join APRO?
I think my first time to come to convention, and I probably joined just ahead of that, was 1989 in Washington, D.C. It was Bill Keese's initial hiring into APRO as the executive director. It was his first convention. I remember meeting him on an escalator at the hotel there in Washington that we stayed at, and that would have been, I don't remember what month, but I mean it was somewhere in that range of the summertime of '89 when we joined APRO. What
made you join? And I know that you were active in the RDA, so I know that kind of played a small foot. But what made Gary and Showplace go, this is all over. This is a lot of people, and this is the right way to go, or at least what you thought at the time when it might have been the right way to go.
Well, by then I'd been sharing ideas with friends in the business at ORDA, like Daryl and Ernie, and they were joining these things, and they said, it's unlimited. There's so many people to learn from, and there's seminars, and there's Edwin, and we had resources there, and it was expensive as a young, fledgling. Of course, by '89, I guess we'd been in business formally for 7 years and totally for 8, including my front porch. So we weren't new to the business. It was just time for us to get legit and be a part of the industry, and I think I was already a retail buying group member, but I hadn't joined Trib, I think, until about 92, 91 or 2. I think it was 92. But yeah, all those things were network opportunities. I just love to learn,
Right. So you mentioned a couple of names twice, Daryl Tissett and Ernie.
Yeah.
Right? What I'm so interested in is everybody says when they have an issue, they have a question, they go to Gary, okay? I'm just letting you know that. They love you out here. But Gary had to go to somebody first. Mm. It sounds like I'm going to say it's them, but just in case, are those the people that you went to?
It was a combination. I mean, I would say Daryl and I and Ernie and I had a lot of vigorous debates. They were not disrespectful. They weren't arguments. They were debates about, I do it this way and you do it that way, and which is best. And we're trying to make our point of how and why we do it. So there was a lot of that at state association meetings. But probably, and so I definitely learned that stretched each of us.
Yes.
We were just stretching each other. I think our experience levels were were pretty similar. Ernie had been in the business a little bit before us, working for another company, and then started his own. Daryl started a couple, 3 or 4 years after I started, but was older and had other business experience. So, I mean, my business experience was pretty much just this. But truly, the biggest mentors, I think, in those early days was, in the early 90s, was probably Norm Slatton.
Really?
Very creative, very dynamic, and his nephew Larry Sutton, and Cynthia Baber Strunk, which is still active in our industry, and Shannon. This was pre-Shannon, but it was she was involved in Trib in the early '90s as a board member, and ran that group. Was president of that group at one point. Learned a lot from them. I would say Lowry Schrader, King Frog Reynolds out of Nashville, Tennessee, was on that board.
King Frog Reynolds.
Yeah, he was had 15 stores and was very creative, and he was a lay preacher, so he preached Sundays. He was a musician, really good musician, so he'd play at all the furniture markets. They'd set up a place, and him and a bunch of guys would pick up instruments and just jam together or whatever. And then he had these stores. But time spent with those guys in those Trib board meetings in the early 90s was super, super educational for me. So I did learn a lot from Daryl and Ernie and others earlier like that. But I would just say I got it to a different level with Slats and Lowry and Larry Sutton and probably even back in the day Carrico and some of the guys were younger than me. You still learn from them. I've learned so much from Mike Tissett, and he's way younger than me. But you hear him say something about me, but I think the learning has went more the other direction. I've learned more from him than he ever learned from me, I think.
But I think that's a good thing, to not only be able to pass on some knowledge and experience, but be able to take from all the people that are around you and say, man, you do this very well as in a different light. You're doing this very well. I need to take this or I need to take that and compound it into a better way of doing rent to own.
Most of my favorite people in this industry have always been the believer that the rising tide rises all ships. And, all those people I mentioned, I feel were very abundant-minded and just wanted to help everybody,
Well, you said something earlier about you're having conversations with David and Ernie, or Daryl, excuse me, Daryl and Ernie, and you're talking, and I do it this way and you do it that way. What was it that Showplace did that you would say, this is our mark, this is something we did a little bit different than our neighbors, and this was how we made success?
I got a good answer for that. What we felt was differentiated us from the competitors that grew up in my first 5 to 10 years, which was Reynold King, a store that built dozens of stores out of Ohio. The competitors that I found in my towns typically had a bit of a reputation for hiding the buyout price, the discounted early purchase option price. They didn't like the store managers didn't like losing BOR to somebody paying off.
Oh, I wish that was a problem. That's probably a great problem to have if you have somebody owning.
That's the
their
way we
merchandise.
looked at it. I got cash.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a great thing for us.
Right.
So what we did was harness that every price tag and every receipt that a customer got showed them their exact discounted payout price. And we used it as a differentiator. We care about you getting a chance to pay off your home mortgage faster and not pay all that interest.
Right.
It's not the home mortgage, it's the refrigerator, it's the TV, it's whatever it was. But our big thing was they don't want you to know when the payout is. We're happy to tell you every week.
But we do.
We do.
Because we want you to own it
Because
here.
we got a good character and we got a good heart, and if we can help you save money and buy it for the lowest possible, one of my employees, one of my store managers, coined the phrase. They had it in their back room, and I loved it so much we put it all over our stores at one point. Is our goal, our mission is to help you acquire ownership if you want to at the lowest possible price.
Hey everyone, it's Pete Chow here from the RTO Show podcast, and I want to tell you about a company that's making a real difference in the rent-to-own space, Wow Brands. I've seen firsthand how they approach marketing, and let me tell you, it's not just about ads. Wow Brands builds complete digital ecosystems designed specifically for the rent-to-own industry. Their e-commerce and lead generation strategies are built to bring in qualified leads. And did I mention that they are actively working with the rent-to-own industry while also being members of APRO and TRIB? Listen, these folks are passionate problem solvers. They don't just slap something together, they design, build, and scale the kind of digital retail tools your business needs and your customers actually want. So if you're serious about growing, reach out to Wow Brands at wowbrands.com. I trust them, and I think you will too. God, I think I remember that at some point.
It was character for us. It was just showing.
Well, absolutely.
We are your advocate. We're not here to hammer you. We are here to help you.
We're here to take care of you.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I love that.
It helped build the culture, and it was our uniqueness at that time, you know. And I don't think we ever left that. You know, we still show on the receipt what your EPO is. And I still say there's a lot of people that didn't want to show that. They didn't want somebody to know they're about to pay off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talking about those moments, because there was a lot of things that had to be pioneered in order to get to where we were, whether it be something that happened in the way of a same as cash, or how that was calculated and thought of, or, you know, reminding everybody an early purchase option is not a bad thing. A paid in full is not a bad thing.
It's success all the way.
Well, and not only that, it also leads to reoccurring revenues in the sense that somebody feels like you had gotten them to ownership. They didn't pay you for no reason.
Super happy with you.
And now they want to come back for more. Yeah. So was there ever a time that you looked at rent-to-own as an industry and thought, I don't know where this is going. We might be in a little bit of trouble. There might be a future that's a little bit grim right now, or a little bit difficult. Or did you always have the idea like, we are on an upward trajectory, whether it's this way or whether it's, you know, smooth, that it's going to be here no matter what?
I don't think I ever really doubted that we could keep it alive. I always had built in the back of my mind, if we ever got outlawed, the alternative, the way I would keep taking care of these customers. You know, there's a couple different ways, but I mean, rent to rent's one, and with a building rewards points thing, and you can buy something at the end with your rewards. I mean, I was concocting ways if something bad happened. I never really felt like we wouldn't continue, like there wasn't a heavy percentage of demographics that needed us, not which very much of even used us. So I always thought the opportunity for growth was unlimited. And I was just always very optimistic about the future of the business. And I also watched in the early days the guys that I felt maybe didn't have the greatest character and was in it for quick money, they come and went. They either failed or they got it to a point where they could sell and walk with some cash, and they did. And what remained was managers, operators, people that did have good character, that took care of customers long term, built good big companies. You know, the Larry Suttons, you know, of the world, you know, buddies and Champion.
It's funny, you say Larry Sutton, who built, you know, what was it, 100 stores at some point or something?
Well, I think Champion had 100 and some stores. I think Larry owned a quarter of, maybe 25 or 30
Maybe I'm saying that wrong.
He had some partners in that group.
And then he decides to make a complete different turn and go to, you know, the tire business.
Wheels and tires.
Explode that, because, I mean, he's just killing it, right? So people sometimes don't know about that. They don't know about the successes. We do, right? Because we're in the industry and we know these people, and we can walk through the halls of APRO, we can walk through the halls of the RTO worlds and the conventions and the meeting of the minds, and we can see those people and say, man, that guy is a success because he cares about his customer, he cares about his business, he cares about his employees. That guy over there does. And we can mention the Ernies and the Darryls and how they've been able to transition down the line, you know, you with Keith. But those are inside stories. What was some of the hardest things that you had to overcome as far as what people thought of rent to own during your time? Because there's been a lot of monikers that have come with rent to own, and you're like, you guys are taking advantage. You guys are selling it at an astronomical price, and without knowing the business model or everything that's included in the rental agreement, included by doing a service, no credit, making sure that we take it out to you and from you for free, or picking it up if you ever decide that you don't want it at that point, and then come back a week later and you still don't get charged for it. You don't know about the cost of the truck, the cost of the insurance, the truck. No idea of that. But they get this idea in their head that, it's a disadvantage.
Because your gross margin. They don't understand your net margin, but they can see your gross margin.
Correct. What were some of the biggest trials and tribulations of getting that overturned in your area and saying, you know what, it's not that bad. Let me get you to a same as cash. Let me get you to a paid in full so that you can own this. And people going, nah, Gary, I know you're going to charge me a whole lot and I don't want to do this.
I never felt the resistance from the customer base.
No.
I always felt gratitude from the customers that they hadn't had a new refrigerator ever before. They'd bought used or somebody gave them one or whatever. I always felt gratitude from the customer base. We tried to explain the agreement really well. They knew what they were doing. Yeah. And I never really felt that kind of mistrust from the customer base. It was more the uneducated do-gooders that didn't understand what you just said, all the backside and costs, that might ask. A family member of mine even might say, how do you sleep at night? You charge too much. Why would anybody do that? Because they never been in that situation, or they don't understand that lack of obligation and the freedom that some people desire. If they want to buy something and they're not sure they're going to like it, you can't do that at the mom and pop TV and appliance store. You can't do that at Kmart,
Right.
But you could do it with us. And after a couple weeks, if you really didn't like it, you just return. We couldn't do anything about it. We were going to try to see if we could solve the problem for you. But at the end of the day, if you wanted to return it, you got to return it.
Right.
And so those benefits and extra services, if something went wrong, giving them a loan or all the little extra things that we all know we do with this business, all the way up to something that paid out last month. There's not many owners I know that wouldn't replace something, Yeah, we replace it. If it's still on rent, we replace it. But if it paid out just last month, there's not many I know that wouldn't go ahead and fix it for them or replace it.
Or do their best by the customer.
Yeah, you just, it's a little bit over the line of what was agreed on, but you're thinking long term here. You just want them to love you.
Sometimes it's hard to be loved by somebody who doesn't know what's going on. Sometimes you have that child and it's like, I love you, but I have to discipline you. If you had something to say, we're gonna start from the beginning all the way through. You started in repairing TVs. You come a little bit further. You start selling TVs. You start getting lines. You start putting more in there. You come across some trials and tribulations of, I've got to make sure that I have it paid. I'm not going to take on this big credit amount. So therefore my growth might have been stunted a little bit because we didn't take on $500,000 worth of debt in the front end because we wanted to make sure that we did it right. But you have other people that might go down that road. They might take that way and go, hey, listen, I'm okay with taking on that debt because I know that I can build it quick or whatever the case is. Coming into these generations now, 2025, and we're talking about moving ahead, what's something that you would tell somebody with all the knowledge and with all the experience that you've built out throughout the years, what's something you would say, I think this would benefit you the most?
Well, I will have to say, and so that I make sure this is clear, we didn't start out with debt, but we grew so fast at one stretch that I did have a credit finance group, a commercial finance group that we built a line of credit with, and we did owe, I think, what we owe? I think we had a $600,000 line of credit at one point, but we were growing so fast. But it was all working out. We always had the money to pay the payment that was required until that big thing happened in the 90s where the commercial credit companies blacklisted all the rent-to-own companies, and they called my loan. And I had to get out of – I had to reduce I think we were in the $700,000 or $800,000 area at the time, and I had to reduce that to 275, and they gave me 90 days to do it, or they were calling the whole loan.
What year was that?
I'm thinking that was 91, 92.
It's funny. I was talking to Waylon earlier, and he mentioned the same thing, that at some point, even
Was
though
Borg Warner Acceptance BWAC was the big one, and we used Chrysler First at the time. There was a number of those commercial credit organizations that floor planned furniture and appliance retailers typically, but they developed a rent-to-own arm to help us grow, and they let some of the fast money early entrepreneurs of the industry get real deep and abscond, spend the money, and then couldn't manage the volume and go bankrupt, and so they blacklisted us, and we'd never made a late payment. I got real mad. My guy called me up and he said, I can keep you at the branch level, which is 275 or under, and Chicago won't know about it. I can keep you in Cincinnati. Chicago won't know about it. But Chicago said, you got to get rid of this guy. But he said, I'll keep you at the branch level. And I had a $600,000 line, and he'd let me go over line as we were growing. I owed him $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 at times. Never made a late payment. And it agitated me so much as a young, immature businessman that I told him, you know what you can do with that 275? I don't need it. And I went looking around at local banks and uncles and everybody else to figure out that about 2 weeks later, I called him back up and said, I'm such an asshole. I'm sorry. I need that 275. And, I found another way to get some to help, a guy that had some dough that I was willing to pay him more interest than he was getting at the bank, and combined, and we shrunk, and we shared. I went to all my employees and said, this is just the worst thing that's ever happened. The big guys are after us, the banks are after us, and we just got to pull together and share product, and it was some of the best teaming momentum we ever had. And man, we got cash friendly quick, and got out of debt, and but yeah, that was a really big challenge.
So would the message going forward be very careful with your money?
Yeah, just I don't know that we'll ever see. I think our industry is more understood now, so I don't ever see a complete exit. We've taught banks what to do. You sometimes have to teach your own banker if you're using a bank, and we did. We used Chase Bank One before they got bought out by Chase. Bank One helped me immensely after that. I taught a commercial lender what our business was and spent a lot of time with him in his hobby, fly fishing and messing around Ducks Unlimited with him, and just building a great relationship. So he'd give me the time to explain the business, and then they gave us a line of credit that was all I ever needed after that. But and I think, and that was something that Trib brought in a seminar one year at a Trib convention, a meeting of the minds out in, I think, Phoenix. They brought in a guy, Summers White, that taught us all how to build a bank relationship. This was right after that debacle with the commercial lenders. But yeah, a new person getting in, I'd just say, don't go hog wild on the debt. Don't borrow more than you can pay back.
That's a tough one.
And that may mean for us in those days, it was, we knew what we made at her bookkeeping job and me at the factory, and I wouldn't borrow more than I knew safely what the business would provide, and I could add to it and still buy groceries, and but yeah, I mean, it gets down to, it's fairly simple math, and what you're going to rent this for, and what and how much you can keep it on rent. Back in those days, whatever you put in the display room, you could rent. And I'd say today we all probably are at that place where there's enough competition, enough other ways to get things, that you can't rent everything you put in the store today. Back then it was not that way. If you had something nice and new that went on that floor, it was on rent in a week or two, and you knew what rent you were getting. And the ability to collect it at a higher percent, I think, was better then than it is now. Of course, we have a lot of arrived at ethics that, in all honesty, my partner would tell me some stories about how he did a pickup, and we wouldn't dare do that today. It was after hours and, sneaking around, and, we had to learn our lessons about that. And we, I can't deny we probably did a few things that we would never do today. I wouldn't let anybody do today. But we probably had some years where we didn't charge anything off the whole year.
Wow.
Nothing.
That's great.
I think we had a stretch when my partner was in charge of all of our collections, and we were probably up to 3 or 4 stores at this time. We had a couple year stretch we didn't charge anything off.
Wow.
But
so, kind of getting to the end of this, I'm curious. In all your years and everything that you've rented and everything that you've had, tell me an item that you weren't sure about that just literally took off.
Yeah, well, probably a couple things come to mind. One is that it took us 3 times to get it into the computer business before it was ever profitable. 2 times I lost my shirt, and we said, we're never renting computers again. But, obviously, time went on. They got more user-friendly, and I figured out how to turn one on. But I would think probably one of the biggest surprise items that went crazy was probably riding lawnmowers.
No kidding.
And I think Daryl was here. I won, but I think it was him was the first one that did it, and the other one we were talking with each other a lot, so it wasn't long. Whoever did it first, the other one did it next pretty quick. I think he rented them first, and that got to be
kind of open your eyes to something.
Well, I mean, we were in rural areas. Not many of my customers lived in an apartment in a city. All my customers rented some 1920 built home in a working class neighborhood where all the people that used to live in that had moved to the suburbs of that little town, and it was where you could rent cheapest. And they built some of those houses into duplexes.
Yep.
And that, those were the neighborhoods we were in. And there was a lot of people at the edges of town on a trailer, on an acre, and they were rental clients. Maybe the trailer parks, they just needed a push mower. But anybody that had much of a lawn,
you want to get a rider.
They wanted a rider.
Yeah, they wanted a rider.
And that surprised me how well that went. And along the way, when zero turns came, and most of my compatriots here, peers at the rental business, said they're just too much money. We always tried a lot of stuff and kept what worked. Zero turn riding mowers is a great rent-own item.
They have been. I actually have seen that. When did you start renting your first mowers?
Let's see. I would say mid-90s, 95,
yeah, that
96.
sounds about right.
Yeah.
That's about when they started coming out.
We did it before I ever saw one in an Aaron's, but once we started doing it, Aaron saw it right away. And I don't know if they saw it at Daryl's area or my area, but it wasn't long after that Aaron's was renting them. Rack took longer before they rented them, but yeah, that was a big surprise. It's a pretty stable income, and we offer a put up program, kind of like a motorcycle insurance offers you a put up program, so you don't have to pay insurance all year long if you're not going to put it in the garage. Well, that's kind of what we do. We'd say, look, at the end of October, you're
not going to use it.
You can pay us one payment a month, 1 week a month, and we'll apply that towards your purchase price. But that's all you owe us during the off season. It's just 1 week a month, and you get to hold and keep your mower, and we didn't have to bring it back and store it.
Which could be a nightmare if you have too many on rent.
Yeah,
that's a great idea.
Yeah, so we did that with window air conditioners too. We'd get people onto a window air conditioner, and they didn't want to keep it and spend the money in the winter, but we could get a decent percentage of them to keep it by paying 1 week a month, and it eventually just paid out, But at least they got to keep it, and they, it was efficient for them not to have to start over again next year, and it kept us from having to bring them back and jack them in and out of people's windows, which was damaging things. And
Yes.
somebody might say, well, I'd rather re-rent it at a new term next year, make more money on that one unit. That's not the way we looked at it. We looked at it long term, like that customer got to own it. They're happy with us. It was more efficient for them. If somebody else was trying to rent it each season to them, they'd figure out the character there. They want to come here, So it was always about the long-term, long-term relationship.
And that's what makes Showplace.
Yeah, I think that's a unique part. I mean, and I think a lot of the good dealers in this industry do exactly the same thing. I think it's just unique to Showplace, but it was our difference against the big guys when we were really getting going.
Well, as usual, it's always a great conversation. I love talking to Gary all the time because the truth is I learn something every single time we have a conversation. But, coming to an end, I got to say, I've loved doing the Legend series. I love being able to speak to some of the people that have been not only in the beginnings of this industry, but have seen all the way to where it's come and their contributions that they've had along the way, whether it's going against, the B. Gonzalez's in Texas, or whether it be, just figuring out this is our RDA, we have to make this work in our state. This is what you do differently. This is what I do differently, and how we make that work for ourselves, what products we bring in at whatever time. And maybe some things work and some things don't. I've never had an issue with computers, but then I hear that there has been. So
it was a long time ago.
It's always there's always those differences, and it's really just great to hear how we've made it so far and through the trials and tribulations to be able to hear in a thriving industry, regardless of what's going on around us in 2025, to say I think there's a pretty good look for next year.
Yeah,
and keep on going.
I'm very optimistic about the industry, the young leaders that are coming up through it. Proud of my son doing a great job, and there's a lot of good young operators at this point, and we just got to teach them think long term, do the right thing. We got to teach them that stuff because it always works out.
Keep the main thing the main thing.
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
Always say that. But we appreciate you guys sitting here with us. This is our Legend series, and we're kind of going back and dialing in from where we were to where we are now. We are so appreciative that you guys stayed with us. If you have any questions, please hit me up at the show. It's Pete at the RTO Showpodcast.com, or you can see me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and now where you're going to see this on YouTube. And kind of just give us a shout if you have any questions for Gary or any of our legends. Please let me know, because I'd love to find out what it is that you were thinking about and what I may need to ask the next one. But we do appreciate your time. We appreciate everything. If you have any questions that you don't know about, make sure that you hit up APRO. APRO is a very big resource, at rtohq.org, and keep them and everybody else in your prayers with the disaster relief that they're doing nowadays. And I will tell you guys, as always, regardless of where you see us, Gary, I'm so glad that you're with us. I'm glad that you're here, and I'm going to share a drink with you a little bit later.
All right. That sounds good.
Get your collections low to get your sales high. Have a great one.
All right.